so that time can go to you all.
Great. Before we go to audience questions, one final one that hopefully will encompass all of the things that we've talked about. What do you think are the main causes of gun violence in our community?
My turn?
Yes.
Okay. It's hard to keep track of who goes next.
It's okay. I really want to thank you guys for being
Yeah.
so positive. This is really what we had hoped.
So I think there's a couple of issues. One is the proliferation and the easy accessibility of guns, which means that, we talked about a kid in the home. We talked about a young person who needs to feel respected, carrying a gun, the ability of somebody like Ian Stawicki to have access to a gun and, find himself go to Cafe Racer where he felt insulted. Somebody who's in despair and has access to a gun, and now that suicide attempt is fatal rather than simply serious. So the availability, I think, is a huge part. I think underlying that availability is an entirely misguided notion. I was talking about it earlier with the debate with Greta Van Susteren, that somehow or another, that when we put gun-free zones on our businesses, that somehow or other that was an invitation to criminals. They'd go there, and the idea that the safety lied in making sure the bartenders and waitresses and patrons had guns. I mean, that attitude is very, very prevalent, and it is not borne out by the facts. And then I think even deeper is the issue of gun use by young men in particular who are attracted to gang life, who don't have opportunity, and to gain respect and appreciation in their community, and to feel that they're going to be not prey, but can defend themselves, will take guns out, and then that lack of respect leads to gun violence. And that's what we saw just a couple of years ago. Many of the shootings we saw were outside of nightclubs where the flashpoint of an argument led to fatality. It led to the tragic death of Justin Ferrari, leaving behind a widow and kids. The shooter felt disrespected and had a gun. We have to reach those young men. We have to reach them, and that's through education, through the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, and dealing with those who've already taken the wrong turns and are trying to come back and make the right turns through Career Bridge. We must get to them, and that requires a partnership with all of the members of our community to help change attitudes about guns and gun use. Thank you.
Thanks. So what underlies gun violence? We know that there are gang problems. We know there are mental health issues. We know that there are a series of reasons that people use guns in a way that's not appropriate. But really what underlies gun violence is, Eisenhower in his last State of the Union address referred to the military as a military-industrial complex. We have a gun industrial complex in this nation and in this world, but particularly in this nation. And there's much that we can do, particularly through 594, to start leading the nation in changing this. But until we go directly at that complex, just like we went at tobacco companies, we will not be able to get at the root of what underlies this culture that makes it so accepting. We are literally an armed camp as a nation. The amount of guns, and I'm sure you've all seen it, the amount of semi-automatic weapons and the like is just completely out of proportion to our population and anywhere else on the planet. And it's because people are making a lot of money at it. And until we go after that part of the industry, and that has to be a national effort, we will not be able to get at the underlying problem of the culture that we've developed in this nation. Thank you.
Senator Murray makes a good point here, and we've gone after big tobacco, and we've made a huge amount of progress against them. And it starts with changing attitudes and approach. And we can go, and I hope we're going to keep going against big oil too, right? We want to divest from fossil fuels, stop coal trains. I'd like to go against big soda. It's time to stop buying our kids with soft drinks. It's serious.
Yes.
It's an addictive thing, and it's bad for our health. And I think it all begins, again, as with these public health issues, with the community organizing, with the community creating a set of values that this is unacceptable, And when you create that level of support, that's when you can start changing things. I was an organizer, I was an advocate, and I thought that we could change elected officials when I was in the Sierra Club. Now that I'm elected officials, I know it's true. So it really does start with all of you, which is why gun-free zones matter. They're not symbolic, you know? It's why gun buybacks matter. It's why the education matters. It's why asking saves kids matters. We change attitudes first, and you're leading on that. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Now we're going to go to some questions from the audience, and I will try to make them appropriate for both candidates. First, this speaks to the state preemption issue. What can you do to make guns illegal in our city parks? Each of you gets 2 minutes, no rebuttal. Senator Murray?
Well, I think it's a process, and I'm going to go back to the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and 594. To change laws, you've got to change minds and hearts. What we did in the marriage campaign, instead of just trying to go straight for marriage, we did a piece of domestic partnership. Just a piece of it, basically, is what 594 is doing. And then elected officials and citizens found out the world was not going to fall down around them, that you actually could change hearts and minds and get votes. And then we did it the next year, and then we did it the next year. And I think the approach that the Alliance is taking is how we're going to get at the state preemption around having guns in parks or other public places that a city does not want them. It's an incredibly important strategy that I believe we need to unite around, because I have watched people who voted for DOMA turn around and vote for marriage. I know through this campaign in 594 and the Alliance, we can watch people who vote against gun responsibility turn around and vote for gun responsibility. I think you have put together an incredible strategy. And I'm sorry I should have said this at the beginning. Thank you for gathering the signatures that you gathered. That is so important at the grassroots level.
Next.
I think Senator Murray's fine grasp of legislative strategy leads me to believe you should stay in the legislature and see this one through. But seriously, if you want to keep both of us, that's the way to do it. And this was really troubling to me as a mayor, to think that we couldn't ban guns in our parks or community centers or pools. We were literally prohibited from it. And the analogy I was drawing at the time when we were talking internally was, well, why can't we be treated like any other, property owner who has the property right to say that? I mean, we're a property owner too. And it just didn't work out that way. We lost at the Supreme Court level. We fought at every level. So we need that preemption removed. But I think part of the way to changing attitudes is through something like the gun-free zones in the businesses. We have 87 businesses now that are signed up to be part of the gun-free zone. And they're entitled to do that. And it's actually nothing new. Even in the wild, wild west, they said, check your gun at the door, because they knew that, and nightclubs and other businesses have had this policy for years. And now we've seen Starbucks move, which I thought was really impressive. And we should be grateful to them. They didn't move as far as our gun-free zone, which is to say they'd ask people to leave if they had a gun. But they did ask their patrons to not bring a gun. And that's one business, but a huge number of outlets. So I think that's part of the way in which we start changing the dialogue and start thinking about the fact that a property owner can have the right to manage its property in a way that leads to feelings of safety and security, and actual safety and security for the people in there. So we'll keep reaching out to other cities as well that are facing the same situation. And again, I think if we can change public attitudes, I think, and with skillful legislators, I think we can change that process. Thank
you. Next. You don't get a rebuttal. No, not for the questions from the audience. Because we want to ask a few more. I do not feel safe taking my children to Westlake, and I would expand that to all downtown. Why has the area deteriorated, and what will you do to improve it? Let's start.
Thank you. And this is a concern I hear in a lot of places. So I mentioned earlier our Center City Roundtable. When I took office, it was the anti-panhandling legislation debate, and it was a very divisive debate, actually. 5-4 vote in the City Council, and kind of everybody retreated to their camps of more, we should be more compassionate, or we should be heavier on enforcement. And the answer is we actually have to have a thoughtful response to each side. So in response to concerns that were raised by our business community and others, we and residents, we brought together our Center City Roundtable. So it has the businesses, the residents, the social service agencies, our city agencies that are relevant, human services, police, SDOT because of the right-of-way, as well as partnering with Department of Corrections, county prosecutor, city attorney. And we're looking at both sides of the equation. We're going to add 52 more police officers, and we've already worked to get more police officers out of the cars, on the streets, walking in the places where they're needed the most. And you can even, we log those hours now. Captain Dermody now logs the hours, and he can show you where they are. We also have worked to expand services to those who have substance abuse problems, something called law enforcement assisted diversion. And we have support from both sides of the equation there, the businesses and the residents and the social service agencies. These are substance abusers who are not violent, can be referred directly to services, and it's promising. We're expanding it. Obviously, people that are criminals, there needs to be immediate and strict enforcement of the rules. You then get into this hazier area of people who are drinking in public, urinating in public, sleeping in doorways when they're asked to leave. For that, they get a ticket. Poor people don't pay tickets. So we have been working with our city attorney, who had, the pendulum had probably swung too far, right? But now I think it's gone too far the other way. We're working with our city attorney to get responsible prosecution of those who won't follow basic rules. Don't take services, don't follow the rules. And we are, those recommendations have come in, we're in the process of implementing, and I hope I'll be able to show you that we're making progress on this in an effective and compassionate way.
So just a little aside, I've enjoyed the 18 years I've been in the legislature, but you don't get 2 for 1. That part of my career is coming to an end. I'm running for mayor of the city of Seattle, and one of the reasons I'm running is because we need a mayor who can actually build relationships with Olympia and understand how Olympia works. On the question around Westlake and downtown in general, it was allowed to fester for too long. So a culture got created, and it isn't going to be easy to end. Yes, some things are being done that weren't being done even as early as this summer, and we're moving slightly in the right direction. But we really do need to look at other models, such as what New York is doing with the call posts, where we have officers who are actually walking the streets on a regular basis, the same officers, and get to know the folks downtown, get to know who's a bad player, who's a good player, to supplement those in cars, not to take away from those in cars. We also, as I said before, I won't speak about the mental health funding coming, but there's a great opportunity to remove those folks into treatment in a way they've never been able to have treatment before. But finally, what I've heard when the police endorsed me for this race is that they don't believe that they have received a clear message about what they should do on the streets. And when police don't have a clear message, then police aren't sure what to do. And I will be sure that I hire a chief that gives a clear message when it comes to criminal behavior. I also have been endorsed by the city attorney. I believe if there's issues around prosecution that aren't being handled, that I can work with this city attorney and I can work with the prosecutor as well to make sure that those that need to be prosecuted are prosecuted. It takes a collaborative effort to move other elected officials along. I think it's going to take a while to change a culture that's been allowed to build up over many years downtown. And not just downtown. There are other parts of the city, Capitol Hill, Lake City, that are also suffering some of the same problems.
This just takes a yes or no answer question from the audience. Will you promise to walk through Westlake Park at 8 p.m.? And I'll say within the next week.
Sure, and in fact, I make it a point to walk around downtown as often as I can. And occasionally.
Yes, it's in my legislative district, so I'm through there often, day and night.
Thank you. Last question from the audience. It's kind of putting a couple together. Since your views about gun control and violence are not, surprisingly, quite similar, what in this mayor's race actually distinguishes you from your opponent? And another question on the same theme, how will your personal communication style and approach contribute to a more open dialogue about this issue? Senator Murray.
Well, thank you, and I think it's really a very, very important question. I do think that there are policy differences, but I won't list those. But I do think that my record is one of, I work in a contentious atmosphere. I don't get to work with just 9 Democratic City Council members. I work with Republicans. I work with some conservative Democrats. I work with people from Eastern Washington. And despite that, I've been able to do things such as pass the cleanest car emission standards in the country, the California standards. I've been able to pass the largest transportation budget in state history that you all in Seattle supported by a huge amount. I've been able to pass the anti-bullying legislation I mentioned, the civil rights legislation that took 29 years, marriage equality, budgets that preserved the services for the most needy, particularly for refugees and immigrants, again, in a very difficult time, particularly in the last 5 years, which have been very difficult. I think I have proven that I can work effectively with other folks. It's my style. And if you talk to stakeholders and citizens who work on an issue, to get to the second part of your question, you'll find that they're in my office at the beginning of the process, at the middle of the process, at the end of the process. And legislators are the closest, I think, to the people in city government. We sit in coffee shops around this city and around this state, day in and day out, talking to constituents about what they need to do. So I think it's that level of openness and that proven record that makes a difference. Thank you.
So I never held office before, and part of the reason I ran for office was because I thought government was getting too distant from the people. You know, I'm a dad, I was a neighborhood leader, I formed a nonprofit to work on environmental issues, worked in the Sierra Club, and when I took office, I thought there were too many issues that had been neglected over time, that we hadn't raised the tough issues, put them out there in the public dialogue. And I think you'll see that I never hesitated to put the issues out there and take some heat. And I have taken some heat, including from Senator Murray, who called my gun-free zone symbolic and who's, criticized our gun buyback program. You know, I've never hesitated to raise the tough issues and have tough headlines. And, you're right, I don't have